I offer this to you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Please be seated. Early in my ministry, I spent 10 years working in the juvenile justice system of New Jersey with maximum security adolescent males. Gang members, most of them, almost all of them Black, some Hispanic, rarely a white kid, mostly born into poverty and generational incarceration, very tough lives on the street. Often quite smart, but way undereducated, and sometimes just about illiterate. So I worked as a teaching artist, using storytelling, the telling of folk tales and myths and legends and true stories, as a way to build an interest in literacy, to have deep conversations about character, both the characters in the stories and their own characters as well, and to create some normal relationships in what was generally a happy classroom, a break from the racism and the classism and the callous control and separation caused by the juvenile justice system and the social mores of American East Coast urban ghetto reality. So let me tell you something about 3 of these young men. And I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to tell you the rest of the story at the end of the sermon. So here's the first one. One time I went into the classroom and told this wonderful story by Langston Hughes called Thank You, Ma'am, which is a story about a young boy who tries to steal a woman's purse. But Mrs. Luella Bates Washington Jones does not let her purse go, so it doesn't go too well for him. So what he does get is a scolding, a hot meal. She gives him $10 and sends him on his way. So I tell the story, and the minute I am done, the kids in the classroom all start laughing and saying to each other how women respond by racial category when you try to steal their purse. Finally, one boy rolls back and says, "Hey, Reverend Joanne, what would you do if I tried to steal your purse?" I said, "Well, I'd let you take it." And he pushed back in his chair. And what he said next, I'll tell you at the end of the sermon. Second time I'm in the classroom, some years later, boy comes in who's never seen me, doesn't know me from Adam. He comes up, he sallies up to me, he says, "So you're a preacher lady?" "Yes, I am." "You talk to people when they're in trouble?" "Yes, I do." "You say sermons?" I say, "Yes, I do." He looks at me and goes, "What does that do?" I started struggling for an answer, and another boy spoke up, and I'll tell you what he said at the end of the sermon. Third one, I'm walking into Martin Luther King Middle School in the middle of Trenton, the poorest, most bombed out capital city in the United States. I'm walking in with a friend, a colleague, somewhat naive, not so aware of the inner city. And as we come in, we see 2 guys on the street, across the street, walking up and down. One's got a cell phone, the other's got a baseball bat. Big sheet behind them on the wall, "Rest in peace, so-and-so," and they're just working the street and cars are going by, slowly, stopping, going. I turned to my friend and I said, "See them, you know what they're doing?" She goes, "No, what are they doing?" I said, "I'm pretty sure they're dealing drugs." She said, oh. And I looked at these guys in their black hoodies and I said to her, "You know, every time I see these guys on the street, after all this time I've worked in the detention center, I just think I'm gonna know one of these guys." And as God is my witness, that moment, a hand goes up from a guy in a hoodie and he says, "Hey, Reverend Joanne, are you still telling stories?" And I said, "Yes, are you still dealing drugs?" But I didn't really say that. I said, yeah, I am. He said, "Oh, that's great. Going okay?" I said, "Yeah, it's going great." He said, "Okay, well, you go." And I went in, and I felt pretty good. I thought, hey, he remembered me. He likes me, but that's not really what that was about, and I'll tell you that at the end of the sermon. But now let me just continue on from where I am. One of the first experiences I had when Paul and I first got here to Vancouver Island was to come here to St. George's on a Tuesday night to sit in on a meeting that had been announced the Sunday before, the Reconciliation meeting. Oak Bay and Cadborough Bay's folks coming together to sort out a sort of a public witness event designed to draw attention to and act on the current historic and current relationship of the settler and immigrant communities and the peoples of the Lekwungen Nation on whose land we live, work, and play. The depth of awareness, the dedication to justice. I mean, having done a fair amount of race work and justice work back home, I was deeply inspired and impressed. And serving this diocese as an itinerant cleric this summer, I have met many personalities, both in the church and outside of it, with strong feelings about the reconciliation movement. We just returned from a visit to Alert Bay and from serving at St. Columba's Church in Port Hardy last Sunday, where I heard some joyfully inspiring stories from both settler and immigrant folks and Indigenous folks about the building of understanding and appreciation and respect and action across community. Work being done, good work being done, side by side, together. Equally, I heard some truly horrible words, jarring and crude, publicly pronounced about Indians and how they are and what they are worth and how they ought to be eradicated. Maybe after church, I will tell you what I actually heard because I wouldn't quote the real words here. But the comments featured words like stupid, lazy, shot. But even worse to me was the confident testimony of a good Christian woman I was chatting with on the beach in Oyster Bay. She goes with folk up to Port Hardy, where she said, "We pray over that dark, dark place where those people have so given in to poverty and alcoholism, those people who don't accept our ministry. Up there, all over, in fact, they believe they were so badly done by they will never forgive. They really are trouble. My family up there wants nothing to do with them. They, them, those people." We hear the same othering and impatience around the Black community back in the States. Slavery is over, Obama was president, move on. Now, generally speaking, your public consciousness here in Canada is well ahead of that in the US, yet, no matter who we are and no matter where we are not exempt from the core clash of the parable this morning. Jesus speaks of wheat and weeds. In his ministry, he passed through the fertile valleys of his land, traveling from place to place, and perhaps he would have seen the sowers in the field, seeding the fields in winter. And then in spring, he might pass through again in time for the harvest. Hard work done quickly by rough, hardened hands, abrupt separation of weed from wheat. Human beings weighing the worth of this and that and destroying that which they considered refuse. And throughout those places, how often Jesus would likewise have seen people who assumed their own value cast aside other beings they presumed to have no value as refuse, like the woman with the 12-year hemorrhage, or blind Bartimaeus, or children even, people they thought weeds, no worth. So Jesus tells the parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. An enemy came, sowed weeds. Plants come up, the weeds appear. The slaves of the householder come and said, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy," and they butt in. "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But no, he says, "No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let them grow together until the harvest. And I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds, bundles, burned, wheat into my barn." It reads like a prediction, like a public policy action plan, but Jesus promises it is a parable. And a parable's purpose is to offer movable and many perspectives. Parables prompt response. So what strikes me is that at the center of the matter, the turning point of the drama, happens at the actual physical point of the story. Not the explanation, but the story he is telling. Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? Do you want us to go gather them? No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat. Let them both grow together until the harvest time. It's mid-season. Mid-season, when both the weeds, of which Jesus speaks, and the wheat, the sower sowed, look exactly alike. It is too soon to tell the difference, too soon to harvest anything. So smack in the middle is a servant antsy to do some quick fix field work that is not his job to do, too soon to do, and risks being absolutely indiscriminate. Jesus places focus on the one who is anxious to rip others out of the story. The overeager soul who would barge in with overzealous quality control. So we have the self-righteous servant, keen to protect the purity of the immediate moment, a procedural plot with a predictable ending, countered by the master, the lord and laborer of land, who is telling a very different story, an epic of long and broad perspective. Let them both grow together until. The parable offers possibility. The parable has no simple punchline. Now, botanically speaking, Jesus has a very good point. Wheat depletes soil if it is sown and grown and harvested only alongside itself over and over, generation by generation. It must be integrated, note, integrated, with other crops in regular rotation. If you happen to have read Suzanne Simard's book, Finding the Mother Tree, you may know that once upon a time, loggers considered birch trees to be weeds among the fir forest. So they weeded them out, and the fir trees grew, but they did not thrive. In fact, a significant percentage of them didn't even survive. The subterranean sharing of nutrients and water and information of threats like invasive species or disease was no longer shared between the trees. Their very differentness, which was their strength one to another, was ripped away. And the great harvest that was expected immediately grew increasingly meager. Forestry as parable. Changes were made. Perspectives shifted. We could take a lesson. Jesus' imagery at the heart of this story is more than a metaphor for opinions. It is also materially true. Be we wheat, be we weed, and for the moment it's mid-season, so who can tell the difference? All souls growing in God's good field are enriched and enlightened by those we grow near. Nourished by neighbor, whether we know it or we like it or not. So remember that conversation I was having with that woman in Oyster Bay. We were standing on a sandbar in the shallows, literally waiting for the tide to shift on the north end of this island. She wanted it to go out. I wanted it to come in. So I replied to her negativity with a few benign words about slavery in America and how much white people had to learn about its legacy, and those who were badly done by still are badly done by. But frankly, the whole thing was irksome, and I really just wanted to go our separate ways. Thanks be to God, something blessed and balanced me. Weeds washing in the sea right near our feet, green and growing, so literal, it was hardly a metaphor reminding me of this parable. That this is a time to grow together, a time for long conversations, not clipped sentences. Not time for me to go all quality control and dismiss her as a weed. I had not planned for Jesus' parable to preach perspective to the righteousness I had arrogated to myself, but it did. Because when we are suspicious or threatened or impatient or fearful, we can do great damage in the moment and in the big picture. Calloused hands that sift and sort too hastily, it's dangerous to actual people. In her book, I Am Woman, A Native Perspective on Sociology and Feminism, Lee Maracle in 1996 wrote, I have come to realize that all decision-making is subjective and emotional, and that the rational thinkers among the Europeans struggle to rationalize their emotional attitudes and beliefs about us in vain. It's better to face the feelings and struggle to grow from them to a better place than to deny the heart and make a heartless decision. Better to struggle to grow to a better place than deny the heart and make a heartless decision. It falls not to any of us to prematurely sort. So now let me tell you the end of those first three stories. Remember the first one about the stealing of the purse. And Reverend Joanne, what would you do if I tried to steal your purse? And I said, well, I'd let you take it. And he pushed back in his chair and he said, yeah, but I wouldn't try to steal your purse. I said, why? He said, because I've grown to know you. Second one, where the kid's asking, preacher, what does that do? And then the other boy steps up and he says, I know what that does. I know what that does. That's when people tell you what Jesus Christ said, and that's when you find out that you're forgiven. I'm forgiven. I've done bad stuff, but God forgives me. You might not forgive me, but God forgives me. That's what that does. And the third one called me out, and I thought, hey, he likes me. That's not what was happening. He was calling out my name so that the Bloods and the Crips and the Latin Kings and the cops on the street all knew that if something bad went down on the street, don't hurt her. She is good people. Something happens to her, you deal with me. He was protecting me. That's what that was. But the justice system, in its superficial assumptions, says these young men are to be yanked out of society. They are no use. They are worthless. They are to be cast aside as refuse. They are punchlines, end of story. They are weeds. And their pain and shame in being so identified is readily evident. Yet, I had a street-level revelation that someone staked his life for me. I was in a lockup to see the Lord's gospel of forgiveness set free. And there, I delighted in this who would have guessed it bond of being known. Worthless? One guarded my stuff. One soothed my soul. One saved my life. These young men nourished my psyche, my sensibilities, my soul in ways that have nourished and will continue to nourish my ministry for a lifetime, all because we grew together. So weeds? No. Wheat. Wheat, to me. Jesus does not offer up in this parable a fait accompli, apocalyptic end-time action plan. No almighty intention about which one can do nothing. Rather, he puts before us an invitation to step into the middle of this moment, to see weeds and wheat from the Lord's perspective. Other as brother, as my urban buddies would say, because the field is mid-season. The weeds, the wheat, indeterminate. Not finished, not fixed. Imagine the great possibility of growth that proximity makes happen. And such is the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ here. We are this parable. This is the tale of our time for our telling. And thanks be to God, our story is not over yet. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy